All right, I did it again. Summer Bird Blue by Akemi Bowman is another book for the oddly specific category of young adult contemporary that I only read because one of the characters is supposed to be asexual and or aromantic. And I don't know. I should probably not do that because I inevitably don't love the book, but this was good though. I mean, it was a good book and I liked it. So, not to, you know, trash on it or anything. How do I explain? Okay, so in this book, this character, Rumi, of all names, Rumi, which is it's a nice name, but, you know, I'm thinking of the Persian poet, not this girl. But anyway, it was Persian, right? Oh my God, get on topic. Okay, her sister dies in a car accident, and so she goes to spend the summer with her aunt in Hawaii, and it's basically just about her like learning to deal with her grief and her anger at her mother for sort of abandoning her, and or just for not being there, and then like a bunch of other stuff. And mostly like she goes through the summer becoming friends with her aunt's neighbors. One of whom is a teenage boy named Kai, and the other is an old man named Mr. Oh my God, I just read this book. Watanabe, there we go. Mr. Watanabe, and I mean, I thought it was pretty good. Like, it took me, I think it did take me a little while to really get into it, but I don't know, I think some of that is just like, because the entire point of the book is about grief of her sister dying, which is obviously horribly depressing, but there's always just part of me that's like, I know people whose sisters have died at terribly, you know, far too early, and they don't quit functioning, you know? And so you just can't help but think like, girl, you're lucky that it's summer and you don't have a job and you have nothing to do, so that you can just quit functioning for weeks on end and it's not a problem really. So I'm just gonna say that. But sort of a thing that she and her sister had was that they wanted to start a band. They wrote songs, and she's trying to finish their final song, and that's it. That's why the title is Summer Bird Blue, because that's the name of the song, because they would come up with the names before they came up with the songs. And yeah, so there's that. One thing that I always think is strange in books where a character has a particular interest, like music or art, is that we never, at least none of the stuff I've read, we never get like an idea of what kind of other artists that they are really impressed by, you know? And like maybe the authors are like, it would take you out of the book or remind you of your own opinions, or I don't know, but it's like, I want to know, you know? Like, it's weird to me, the idea of somebody who's very into the idea of writing music, I don't know who her favorite artist is, you know? And I feel like that's something I should know. But whatever. So, what was I gonna say? It was pretty good. I liked the Hawaii setting, and the one interesting thing is all the Hawaiian characters talk in a different English dialect, where they use, well, they use a few different words and they just have kind of a different way of like constructing some of their sentences. And at first it was weird because I was like, this seems strange, but I got used to it. I was like, okay, I guess that's just how they talk. And they all talk like that. It's not just characters who are, well, because all of the characters are people of color, but you know, it's like, I don't know, what am I talking about? So like, so Rumi doesn't talk in this Hawaiian kind of pidgin dialect, but the other characters often do. It's not hard to understand. It's not really that different, but yeah, there's like a lot of surfing and guitar playing and listening to music and stuff about grief and anger and whatnot. And I did like it. I thought it was a pretty good book. It was also just really sad. So now I'm sad. Thanks, Akemi Bowman. It's also a really pretty cover. I like the waves. Okay, we're done. Thank you. Next. Hello, hello. I finished reading When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nghi. The second book of this little series. Let's see, I think the Singing Hills cycle, I guess is what it's called. I read The Empress of Salt and Fortune last month and thought it was really great. I didn't like this one quite as much, but I think that's just kind of because the structure was a bit different, and it was still an interesting idea. It was a bit Scheherazade, a little bit. So in this story, that cleric Chi is traveling, and they're trying to get somewhere, and they're taking a route with a particular person, just like right then that they've just met, who is a mammoth guard, and they're like in the northern reaches, right? And where the mammoths live and whatever. And so then they get attacked by 3 tigers. So the bulk of the story is that they're in this this barn at night, hiding from the tigers, and the tigers are like, listen, all right, we're probably gonna eat you, but they realize that she knows a story about this ancestor of theirs, and so there's kind of this back and forth that she will tell part of the story, and then they'll be like, oh, that's not correct. This is the way that we tell it. And that was pretty cool. As a concept, I thought was interesting. It ended kind of abruptly. I don't know. I felt like there was a lot, like the first book had a lot of like, I don't know, it had this longing to it. It had this like emotion, to it that this book doesn't really. But the story that they're telling is about this tiger ancestor of theirs who fell in love with this human scholar, and it's interesting to see sort of the human perspective and then the tiger perspective. But also this happened a long time ago, so there's no real way of knowing like who is right, but she is writing down the things that they tell her, or I keep doing that they tell them, and because that's the whole thing where the clerics of the Singing Hills, you know, record all of this history. And yes, the tigers can talk and they can look like humans if they want to. It's a whole fucking thing. But anyway, I did think it was really nice. Just not as nice as the other book, which isn't really fair to compare it, maybe, but I am. So I do really like the cover. And I really hope that Nghi comes, you know, publishes more in this little series, because I'm really enjoying it. I love the concept, and it's got just kind of the right amount of magic and sort of myth, legend type storytelling that I really am enjoying. And I know that she's written other books. Well, there's one I can think of off the top of my head that's probably quite different, but, you know. An author that I might read more of at some point. But look at the pretty tigers. All right. It was good. All right. It's time to talk about Beartown by Frederick Bachman. Yes, it is the same day as I filmed the previous clip because I finished 2 books today. What's up? Okay, so Beartown, I listened to this one. I've never read any Frederick Bachman. I know that he's fairly well known, at least goodness, among some of the booktubers that I watch are pretty into him. I don't know if I'm terribly interested in any of his other books at the moment, but this one was interesting to me. So Beartown is about a town in presumably Sweden, but for some reason the book like never says what country it's set in. And they have a hockey team that they're obsessed with. And the hockey team, I mean, there's actually multiple hockey teams, but the juniors, which are like the teenage boys, the older teenage boys, have gotten good enough that they're in the finals or whatever, right? And if they win and everything, it could revitalize the town because a hockey school might be able to open up in their town, and then all of these other like effects coming on from that. Unfortunately, then for them, their star player rapes a girl at a party, and then he gets arrested, and everybody's mad about it. So that's essentially what the book's about. It takes a long ass time to get there, let me tell you. It takes its sweet time. But I really liked it. I thought it was a very good book. It was a lot of setup of all of the different characters living in this town and the different kind of, I don't know, things about hockey and how it was connected to all these other things in the town and how everyone felt about all this stuff and the different coaches and their relationships and how they coach and all of the different teammates, not all of them, like a few of them, the teammates, and you know, just a bunch of these different characters. And then finally you get to Kevin raping Maya, and then after that it's all of this reaction to that on the part of different characters. And it's a lot. Yeah, I really liked it. I mean, people react as badly as you fucking think they're going to Maya coming forward about what happened. And it's, boy, you will be disappointed in so many characters, you won't even believe it, but not all of them. Some of them are stand-up, and that's good. And I think ultimately it has a positive ending, for all that there's a lot of like negative things as well tied in with it. But I thought it was a very good book. I don't normally read contemporaries. I don't know, like, it's not really my thing, but I was interested enough by the premise that I finally decided to give it a go. And yeah, was there anything else I wanted to say about it specifically? I don't know. I really liked Benji and Amit and Maya's parents and Ramona, the lady who runs the bar. She was a badass. Yeah, and I liked the style, which was written fairly well. Like, sometimes it was a little irritating because he would, like, go out of his way to state things very baldly, just sort of state things like, I can't really give an example, but off the top of my head, but, like, he would just tell you things that I feel like could have just been more implied by everything else, like stuff that the audience could have just figured out on our own, which I think was effective sometimes, but other times it was just kind of unnecessary. But yeah, I don't know. Also, if you don't know anything about hockey, it's fine. I don't really know much about hockey, and I followed it fine, so. Of course, I don't know nothing about hockey, but like, you don't need to know anything about hockey, it's fine. It's a good book. Alright, time to talk about The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which every American, approximately, read in high school, myself included. So, but you know what, I was like, I want to read it again. I've been thinking about it, and there's an audiobook on Libby, so I listened to it. And this is like a really good book, you guys. I think it takes a little while to really, or at least it took a little while to really like grab me, but I kept going because I'm like, I know how it ends. I know that it gets, you know, I know that it will make me feel things. So you eventually get there. But it's just such an interesting, like, it's one of those books where you can just pick at it forever. Like, all the things about the characters. And it's such a short book, but there's so much to talk about. Like, it's wild. And it has such a gorgeous ending. Like, it's not just that iconic last line. It's like the whole bit leading up to it is just lovely. Like, he's talking about, he's kind of summarizing it. He's kind of, you know, ending it, because the whole thing is told from the perspective of Nick Carraway. So he's like telling it like a story. And, you know, he's talking about how kind of it's interesting that the thing is set in Long Island, but all of the major players are from the Midwest. So he calls, it's kind of funny because there's like slightly older terminology. He calls it the Middle West. And he talks about it like, he says it's the West. He said like they're from out West, even though like where they're from is from like Chicago and Minnesota and stuff. But anyway, it's funny, but it's an old book. And in the, you know, and then he starts talking about kind of this concept of what the Midwest is to him, and how it's not the farmland and the country, but he starts talking about this very specific feeling of coming home from college and waiting at Union Station in Chicago for the train that was going to take the other friends further west to wherever they lived, and like and it's like snowing, and it's this whole thing, and I was like, these vibes are immaculate, and I also completely understand what he's trying to convey. And then that all leads into the idea that we're all constantly reaching for a future that we'll never quite achieve. And, you know, and then you get that last line about, yeah. Anyway, so it's such a good book. But okay, it's not like it's just the last 2 pages that are really good, but it really is a good book. Like, it's just, the characters are so, there's just so much to talk about with them. I don't know why Gatsby is an interesting character, because I'm listening to this and I'm just like, this guy, on one hand, he's creepy, isn't he? I mean, he's been in love with Daisy for years, to the point where instead of, I don't know, moving on with his life, as she obviously has because she's married and everything, he makes all of this money specifically so that he can buy this big house in the neighborhood where she lives and kind of have this lifestyle that he thinks would appeal to her. And yet she does love him. And yet she can't give him quite what he wants, which is for her to say, you know, it's you, I've only ever loved you. Essentially, that she's always felt the exact same way he does. And she's like, no, but I loved you too, but I also did love Tom at one point, and Tom sucks. Like, he straight sucks. Like, we can talk about this guy and how much he sucks. I was pretty amused by it. This bit early on where he's talking about like the books that he's been reading and how all this crap about like the Nordic race, and like he gets quite racist, and but I thought it was a little bit funny, because Tom is clearly written as this character who's never, you know, he's one of those guys who wants to say, oh, the accomplishments of the white race, essentially, and like claim those accomplishments upon himself, even though he has contributed nothing to any of them. That kind of guy. Y'all know? Everybody knows, right? They haven't gone away. And it's, yeah, so Tom is frustrating and irritating and the worst, and also Daisy sucks too, but it's just, there's a lot in this book, which is probably why they make us read it in high school. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I want to read more from these like early 20th century American classics authors, right? I've never read anything else by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I've read, you know, a few other people briefly, or not at all, who are from that kind of era, and I want to get into it, but this is the easiest kind of to get your hands on. It's like definitely the most read book of his. I think I read somewhere that it was one of the books that was sent to like US soldiers in the Second World War. Like there was some printing of like short paperbacks, so that while they're all sitting around in the trenches getting gangrene and smoking, they were reading The Great Gatsby. I don't know. It's such a good book. Whatever, shut up. Okay. And I want to watch that Baz Luhrmann movie again because I love that movie. Listen, it's so easy to entertain me, and one of the ways that always works is just put like wildly anachronistic music in stuff. So there's a lot of like very modern music in that movie, but it's still set in the 1920s, so I love it, right? Anyway, it's a great book. I'm gonna move on now. The Pearl by John Steinbeck. It's a tiny little book. Goodreads says it's 96 pages long. I don't know if I can trust Goodreads, but it was a very short audiobook, so probably not too far off. Yeah, so anyway, I know I'm not gonna make my Goodreads goal this year, but I still thought, well, let's just listen to another classic, but like something really short that I'd come across. So The Pearl works. I haven't read any John Steinbeck since high school, where I read The Grapes of Wrath. So the fact that this story focuses on a very poor man is like not particularly surprising. I think, not knowing that much about Steinbeck myself, really, that seems to have been something that he paid attention to in his writing. But Pearl, God, okay, so it's pretty basic. It's about this Native American guy named Kino, who, I'm saying Native American, I'm not entirely sure where the story is set, but a Spanish colony in the New World somewhere. So I'm gonna go with maybe Central or South America, just based on some stuff where I don't think it's an island. Because I think it's actually like the land. Anyway, Kino is a pearl diver, and one day he finds the titular pearl. And it's like this enormous, beautiful pearl, and he's like, I know this is worth a lot of money, but the men in town who buy the pearls off the pearl divers aren't willing to give him as much as he thinks it's worth. And it kind of devolves from there, but it's a very short book, so like not really that much happens. It was interesting. Like, okay. I feel that it has, how shall I put this? Because when I started it, I'm immediately like, okay, it's about a guy who finds a pearl that's worth a lot. Okay, so probably things are not gonna end up great for him, right? And I feel like it and like I was right, but I feel like the book was original enough to like not run straight into the most cliche kind of version of that story, because instead of it being necessarily that Kino, say, now has access to all of this wealth and stuff and it like corrupts him, that's not what happens. Instead, the fact that he has this very precious thing that's worth a lot means now everybody wants to take it from him. And I don't know, I mean, I guess you could look at it either way. You could look at it like, well, his zeal to protect this thing over all else leads to, I'm just going to spoil it, the death of his baby. Son gets shot in this fight. But I think you can also look at it like everyone's desire to take advantage of this man who's come into this incredibly lucky find is what leads to this negative thing. So, I don't know, it was interesting. There were some interesting bits, like the contrast between the way that Kino and his family live in extreme poverty and, say, like the doctor character who at the beginning of the story refuses to treat their son for a scorpion bite until they find the pearl, and then he's intrigued because, of course, like everyone else, he sees the pearl and he thinks of what he could get from it. And it's like, this is a dude who lives in a nice house and has kind of fancy food and is living a good life. And it's frustrating to see that that contrast, because like Kino here is thinking, with this Pearl, like we could get married in a church, and my son could go to school. And I'm like, I hate this. But anyway, I think that's sort of the point. It was like, fine, I don't even know. It isn't really my kind of thing, and it's not exactly the John Steinbeck I would be most interested in reading, but it was there, so I read it. And now I know, I guess. Guys, it's time to talk about The Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. Another gorgeous book. It's all yellow inside. Love that too. This is the third book of the Daevabad trilogy, which is this really fantastic fantasy trilogy that I've been reading this year. And that's the conclusion, and now I'm done, and I'm sad. Oh boy. I liked the conclusion, but I have some critiques, but like, not enough that I really care that much. I'm not like, oh, it was ruined. I'm not that invested, right? No. I just feel that some of the stuff with the main villain character went off the deep end a little bit. Like, I felt like some of the things that she did, I don't know. I mean, I can see what the author is going for. I think maybe it just escalated too quickly or something. Like, I don't know. I just felt like the character reached a point where I didn't find her interesting anymore because she was just too dramatically evil. And maybe that's just me. I don't know. And also, like, there's a focus in this book where you have several moments, several sections, not sections, but chapters spent with, like, the Marid storyline comes up a bunch, and stuff with the Marid, and they're like they're kind of like the sea equivalent of Jinn in a way. And they're fairly different, but they live in the sea. That's all you need to know. And in water. And then the Peris, which are like these air spirits. And, well, I mean, I don't know, because like the thing is that the Marid stuff has been coming up since the first book to some degree. It just kind of climaxed in this one. The Peris, like, we've known they existed. In this book, they attempt to actually like affect something that's going on in the plot, but I think ultimately it doesn't make that big of a difference. Like, I think it would bother me more if, I don't want to spoil it precisely, but if Nari, my god, I just read this book. If Nari had actually gone through with like what they told her to do and succeeded, then I think that'd be more annoying. But, you know, because it's like, who are these characters? Like, they don't, who cares what they want? And they shouldn't be here affecting the story to such a great degree, but it wasn't that bad. And ultimately, there's just a lot of stuff that I loved in this. And I spent a lot of time crying over Ollie, as usual, always, because I love him. And there was more good Dara stuff in this book. Like, I know if you recall, you probably don't. Months ago when I read the first book, I bitched about how much I hate Dara. And like, he just had a very strongly bad first impression for me. And he never fully recovered from that, but still was a character where I was like, I feel sorry for him. He's gone through some seriously bad things. And, you know, kind of in this book especially, realizing that the people that he's served and worshipped his whole life have not, you know, like really been worthy of that, or haven't treated his loyalty with kind of loyalty back in kind, that kind of thing. Like, they took advantage of him in various ways. And Maniza then does some pretty awful things. And yeah, so I was like, I do like this storyline. And Nari. I feel like I should talk about Nari. I just have less to say about her, probably because she's the main character. But we learned some more stuff about her backstory in this book, so that was interesting. And she kind of had to make some like major choices But yeah, I did really like it. I think it's a very good trilogy. Yeah, and I'm glad I read it. I'm glad that the few people I heard describe it as more young adult, I mean, they're just like not correct. It isn't a young adult series. It's an adult series. And you know, the minute I hear young adult fantasy, my brain turns off. I have no desire to get into that. But this is not a young adult fantasy. So maybe that's worth knowing. If anybody was told that, it's not. It just isn't. It is a fantastic trilogy, so I highly recommend it. And I really liked this book, and I liked the conclusion. Well, this is it, the final book of the year. Floating Worlds by Cecelia Holland. This is a deeply strange book, and gosh, explaining it is going to be a little difficult. I mean, the plot itself, not that complex. It's just hard, I think, to get you to understand the strange way in which this is written. Okay. So this is set far in the distant future, and a woman named Paula Mendoza is hired, I guess I'll say, hired to go to Mars to meet some men, some leaders from this group called the Stith Empire. And the Stiths are mutants. They were human. They are still mostly human, but they're mutants. They're like 7 feet tall, and they have claws, and some other stuff. And they are that way because they live out by Saturn and Uranus, and they have their cities out there and their own culture out there and everything. And more recently, they've been getting into clashes with some human interplanet kind of vessels, some ships and stuff. And Paula Mendoza really is only hired for this job because she speaks Stith, because she learned it when she was in prison for a while. And beyond that, it's an interesting book. Like, Paula is from Earth, and they have their government is, they don't really have a government. They have anarchy. Everyone just does whatever. And Paula has very that spirit in her a lot. Like, she really just kind of does whatever she can to survive and to get ahead and just to live her life. And so she susses out that the best way to get the leader of this particular group of Stiths, who is a member of the Stith, like, government. Like, essentially they have these guys who are like in charge of whichever city or whatever, and then all of them together make up this ruling body. Okay, so he's a member of that, and she susses out that the best way to get him to like listen to her and like work with her is to seduce him a little bit. So that's fun. And then she convinces him that essentially they need to open up a kind of a trade with the inner planets, and that he could make a lot of money from something like that. And basically, like, they negotiate it to having a treaty for a period of time for like 10 years. And so it kind of goes on like that, because then she finds out she's pregnant and is pretty pissed off. But then she ends up going with him to his, like, not planet, but like little space station thing that he lives in. And it's it's a weird book, all right? Like, all of this stuff with the way that the Stith live is just very interesting, but nothing is explained in detail, right? Like, it's all in little bits and pieces, and it's from Paula's perspective as someone who doesn't really know that much about any of the science behind any of it or the reasons behind any of it, but it's just kind of observing it or trying to live with it. And her relationship with Saba, who is the Akelar, who is kind of like the main guy that she slept with, and then his like right-hand man, dude who's kind of obsessed with him, another Stith named Ten Wojin, and her relationship with him, and also with a bunch of other Stith characters who pop up throughout the thing, and then with her son, and like, it's so interesting. It's so weird. I love the way it's written, but I would never want every book to be written this way, you know what I mean? Because she writes in a very like, let's see, a very like terse style. Sentences tend to be short. She tends to just kind of tell you little bits of what you need to know. And I kind of love it, but it's also, it doesn't like flow, you know what I mean? But honestly, it reads pretty quickly nonetheless. There's some like weird, how do I explain this bit? Oh boy, because I feel like I need to mention it. There's some weird like race politics in this book, in that, of course, it's set it's supposed to be like 2,000 years in the future, right? And so obviously things are quite different, but part of the thing you learned fairly early is that on Mars, they're very racist. Like, they really just don't like anybody with brown skin on Mars. And they don't, it's not like they don't let them come to Mars, but like, they don't treat Paula the best. And then they really don't like the Stiths, because the Stiths are all black. And I'm not sure if that's like because they originally descended from black people, or if that's also part of like the ongoing mutation of why they look so different from everyone else, but maybe it's both. But they just like really hate them. So there's some weird shit with that. There's also, and I feel like this is the thing I really need to bring up, weird shit with use of the N-word. Okay, I didn't love this, but it's used as an insult by the Stith towards humans generally. Like, I keep saying like the Stith are still human basically, but like obviously because like Paula and Saba were able to have a baby, but like their culture is so different. They don't really like think of themselves as the same thing in many ways. But anyway, it's like a weird thing, okay? It's weird to read, and like, it's a choice. I guess that's all I can really say about it. It is indeed a choice. But do I recommend this book? I mean, yeah, kind of. If you like classic sci-fi and you've never heard of it, because it's apparently not like widely known. It didn't win anything, I don't think. Kim Stanley Robinson like stands this book, but I've never read anything by him, so I don't know. Yeah, so, but mainly it's because Cecelia Holland only ever wrote this one sci-fi novel. Everything else she wrote has been historical fiction. I don't know anything about it, but apparently it's like well-known and acclaimed. And then she wrote this one very strange and interesting science fiction book. It's set over the course of years that pass, and there's some pretty unpleasant things about it. But I really enjoyed it. It was very strange. It was just a look into a very different world that doesn't feel the need to explain why it is the way it is, or to like soften itself for an audience that might be like, oh boy, for a lot of bits of it. And I kind of love it. So yeah, this was a good book. It really was.